on this computer. Okay, we're recording.
Got it.
Okay, hello, I am Vicky, and this is my partner, Cristina. And today we will be going into a deep dive of methodologies and theories from Unit 2 for our Chicana 105 class, which is studies of Central Americans in the USA. So I'm going to be introducing Cristina, my lovely partner. So she is a wife and a mother of 3 kids, which is just incredible to me. Her major is sociology, and she is minoring in Chicana studies. She took a little time off of school, a 10-year break, but she had kids, she was working, she was traveling, but she's finally finishing up her degree, and she's hoping to be done this fall, so it's going to come up sooner than expected. Yes. She's a huge I Love Lucy fan, and she's married to a Cuban Ricky, and 2 of her kids are named Lucy and Ricky, and 2 of her dogs are named Fred and Ethel, and I just think it's so cute. But yeah, that is my partner, Cristina. So without further ado, I'll be jumping into the questions for this project. So Miss Cristina, using a couple examples from class, readings, lectures, and discussions, how does working memory help you or help us rethink and reconceive of Central Americans beyond the subaltern space of solely being traumatic/traumatized?
I started to go back to Esther Hernandez's article and then the interview that they had, and she talked about how that the working memory is kind of like, I see it as telephone. Like it starts one way, and by the time it gets down to second, third generation, it changes. The story changes, it's not right, or things get mixed up in communication or whatever. But she talks about how she was teaching a class, and how she was talking about the mural that and one she had something about the military, and her portray of it was the military was bad, and then how a student, they had a debate because his father, I guess, was in the military and he heard a different story.
Right.
So it's kind of like getting both sides of the story, you get a fuller picture of working memory, so that helps us to put a better picture together of working memory, instead of just seeing one side of the story.
Yeah, I would definitely say too, it's like kind of having more perspectives than just one, right? So
yeah, exactly.
Yeah, it'll just really help you see every side to the story, because not just one side is right. It's like, well, this person saw it this way and that person saw it that way. So I could definitely see how like that connects to what you were saying. And I actually really like the analogy of telephone. That one's good.
Yeah, and yeah, because and it just came to me like thinking that is, because so many, the students, even the video we watched, I can't think of what it's called, where they went to, El Salvador.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And, just, you don't hear, their parents didn't tell them things, and,
Right, yeah.
or, they just hear different stories. And, I think that when you get both sides of the story, it just helps, and it just betters everything, it's, I don't know what else, just gives you a different perspective, like you said,
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. Thank you for sharing your answer. So, how might we consider the interdisciplinary and cultural interventions in public spaces studied in Unit 2 as acts of healing for Central American disparate communities?
For this, then I guess knowing the history, I think helps, kind of going back to that first, kind of hearing both sides,
Yeah.
but knowing, same thing with the students going back to, their homeland, where their parents came from, and, experiencing what their parents experienced, gave them a different perspective, and kind of help them to kind of understand why their parents feel the way they do about El Salvador, or um but I definitely think history helps the present day, you know um and that goes for anything really, like you can't move on without knowing your history.
Mhm.
um what else? Yeah, I mean, yeah, I think that was
Yeah.
it. Yeah, I mean, I think just knowing the and then knowing like the political part of it too,
Right.
um I think that would help. I
Yeah.
don't know.
I could definitely agree with that. And also I kind of see it as like the more you kind of know about where you came from, or like where your parents came from, you kind of get like you said, a clear picture, a better perspective. And you kind of also start to understand your identity of like who you are and where you kind of fit in this world. And I
Yeah.
can definitely see like, Central Americans always kind of fighting for that, right? And I think like
Mm.
Unit 2 has definitely shown us that. Do you want to go like a little in more detail of like how like Central Americans can like find kind of like a space within the community and like maybe use that for healing too?
Yeah, um I mean, for instance, like a class like this,
Right. Yeah.
learning more, about, you know, your background, and just learning the history, just I think helps, um, people heal, you just from that, I remember that video or that documentary is, so many of the students were talking about how their parents, didn't want them to go there, or they didn't even want to tell their parents because they were so concerned about them not letting them go or whatever, And I just think that, um, it's amazing that they still went. And when they got there, remember them sitting there and they're being interviewed, and they're in like awe of what happened,
Right.
and it's it's sad to see, but at the same time, it's like eye opening for them, It's, and you kind of see like, okay, like there's a little part of them that shows a little compassion, for their
Mhm.
parents.
Definitely. I think going back to, yeah, like they just gained more understanding. Like maybe that's why they didn't tell me anything. And like connecting it to the first question, like it is a lot of trauma and it is a very traumatic experience for immigrants coming from Central America. But
Mm-hmm.
I think it's also really cool because we kind of get to understand why they immigrated. Like for a lot of people, it's really hard to even talk about that. And so even though like some children like students may get upset that their parents don't share that, I think we also have to kind of understand like it is a very traumatic process, right? But I feel like through working memory, like you're able to not just see the bad but also the good. And like back to what you were saying, like it's just a better understanding of what they went through, like because as kids you're just curious and
Yeah.
you're just gonna want to know what was the real reason. And I mean, I like you, I just admire those kids so much for even going to El Salvador and disregarding like what their parents were saying, like I don't want you to go, or some of them didn't even tell them that they were going. So
Yeah.
there's a lot of strength in those children for sure. And I mean, yeah, I don't know how I would have been able to done that. But is
Yeah.
yeah, anything else you want to add?
Um, no, you know, for healing for them, I just feel like, their parents, going back to them, you know, seeing all this, being at, like where they went to, I think it was um, not a nursery, daycare. Was it a daycare that the nuns and
Mhm.
priests were, I mean, that's just got to be heartbreaking,
Right.
but then I want to think that, these kids, have to understand their parents maybe too didn't want to um, tell their kids, these horrible things,
Right.
like maybe they're you know, just saving them from the heartache, I don't know, but I mean, yes, it could be healing to them to know,
Mhm.
but at the same time, parents are just trying to protect their kids, so.
Yeah, I totally can see that too. Um, Kind of transitioning to the next question. What theories and methods from Unit 2 allowed us to envision the ties that bind Central Americans, Latinx, and Chicanx communities together? And why is it critical to have conversations that center relating ourselves with others and generating connections of others in ourselves? That was kind of loaded. So if you want to like take it step,
Yeah.
totally cool.
Um, yeah, this one was kind of oh, well, okay. So I went back to Dr. Asuna's the interview that they had with him, and he talked about these transnational obstinate memories and how the stories of their struggle, as kids and migrating over here. And he talks about this time during the summer when he would go with his mom to work. She cleaned houses, and how he would see another little kid outside with the gardener, probably his dad, and it's just interesting to me that things like that could bond, people together, knowing, like, my parents, they had to work and they couldn't afford, daycare. And, I saw the struggle that they went through, and, we both experienced the same thing. And he talks about like, oh, um, that may have been the thing that stopped me from going over the edge, I think he says, or something like that, doing, worse things or bad things, as a kid, because, oh God, like my mom has to go to work, or my mom worked a long day, or, just seeing his mom, do hard labor, for little, or like he says, sometimes they didn't pay, on time or whatever. And it was a big thing, but
Definitely.
I just think that um um yeah, that you have these common grounds, um for the working parents like that, that do the hard labor like that. And
Yeah.
I just think it bonds people together when they realize, the sacrifices their parents had to go through.
Right. Yeah. And I could definitely see that too, because it's like as much as we kind of all are different, we have so many common similarities. And I think that that's really what bonds us. And I think that that's truly like what we can do to like be allies and like kind of come together and help one another out. Because at the end of the day, like we all struggle, we all go through hard times, and it's not just one or the other, it's like all of us. And it's definitely something that I think it's really important to just make sure to remember that we're there for one another and we should bond over those things, right?
Yeah, definitely.
So now I have a couple questions for you that are from me. So in what ways oh my bad, I totally blanked out. What personal connection can you remember that relates to the definition of working memory?
For me, I think this was similar to like a discussion we went through,
Mhm.
and I brought up a memory of my grandpa he came from Mexico, and I remember asking him, like I was just so curious. Like I always just thought like, oh my gosh, that's so amazing that you came, from Mexico. Like I want to hear everything. Like, how did
Right.
you do it? Like, how old were you? And, and I just remember it being so hard for him to give me any type of details. Like,
Mm,
he would just get sad. And, I think he must have been teens, like young teens. And he would, just tell me like he had to leave everything. He didn't know if he was going to ever come back. Um, and I don't even know if he ever went back to Mexico, but he would get so sad about it. And it just like, I didn't understand at the time. Like, I just was like, why aren't you telling me information,
yeah.
And yeah, I just didn't know. And I just was like, I don't know. I guess it was just the suffrage that he went through crossing, and the heartache of it, So it just left me with a blank, like this, um, like hole in a story,
Yeah.
it was kind of like I was missing something.
Yeah. No, I definitely get that. Totally understand that. It's definitely hard to talk about. I know a friend who kind of had a similar story too. Like her grandpa refused to talk about it. But he was part of the Bracero program, and
Oh
that was
wow.
super traumatic for him. So
Mm-hmm.
yeah, I could definitely see that. Um, yeah. So next question: in what ways can Chicanx students be allies of Central American students?
Um, I mean, I guess this one, I mean, basically what we're doing, I mean, classes like this, um, in communities, joining together. Um, um, I know people have to experience, these biases against, you know, Central Americans, and, like Hispanics or,
Mhm.
um, so I think, um, coming together, creating forces, groups, um, just getting, education out there, I think is what's important.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think that this class is like the first step of many. So I definitely can agree to that. Yeah.
Yeah, like I definitely like this class has been definitely educational. And I mean, I know it's just like the intro to Central Americans, but I mean, it's definitely been very insightful.
Yeah, I agree. Well, those are all the questions for me. Thank you for answering. And now we can switch off. So whenever you're ready.
Okay, well, let me introduce you, Vicky, Victoria, but she likes to go by Vicky. This is Vicky's last semester here at Cal State Fullerton, and will be graduating in May. Um, she is currently a double major in public relations and Chicano studies. She loves both her majors, loves being able to see them connect with each other. Um, in her spare time, she loves binging on Netflix, which I do too, and true crime videos. I'm like Law and Order SVU every day. She enjoys spending time with her family and creating projects for social media. So very interesting. What kind of social media projects do you do?
So currently right now I'm interning for a nonprofit. So I'm creating a lot of their graphics so that they have stuff to post. And recently I've been getting into Instagram reels because that's like all the rage on Instagram. So I have to like jump on that train. So yeah, those are kind of like the projects I do. And I do a lot of it for work. But I'm trying to get more into like my own, like get focus more on my own work versus like for school or work or like,
Yeah.
because I want to like uplift my personal brand or but yeah.
That's cool. That's really nice. Um, okay, well, let me go ahead and get started on these questions for you to hear your answers. Okay, first one, using examples from our studies in how does working memory help us rethink and reconceive of Central Americans beyond the subaltern space of solely being traumatized?
Yeah, so working memory for me has kind of always been about it's like you remember, I think when we all go through experiences, we remember like bad memories or good memories, right? And
Mm-hmm.
so for me, working memory, and once I heard about it and I read more about it, I've always kind of, to me, like I define it, and I would say is the definition. Um, it's like you remember the entirety of it, and it's not just one side or the other. You're taking in consideration both sides and like both both parts of the story, and just kind of, as bad as it was, there was something in there that was also good. And if it wasn't good, it was just a part of it, right? And it's just kind of, um, when we think of immigration and like immigrants and even like the kids at the borders and cages, it's like that is all so traumatizing, right? And
Yeah.
to me, it's scary and it's sad, and I absolutely hate that it's happening. But it's also like for those immigrants, right? It's like what can they bring from their home that they have in their heart? And so it's like the mural, like that was such a perfect representation for me, because you see the landscape, the greenery, the church, and then you see like the women in the traditional wear, but you also see kind of the starts of the war and like the police and the resistance and all of that. And as much beauty as there is into that mural, there is so much in it that it's like that goes deeper, and you're kind of seeing both sides, and I think like me being, Mexican American or Chicana, it's just like I completely understand that, because I feel like people always have a really bad perception of Mexico, like hay narcos, there's like violence,
Yeah.
killing, rape, and like as as real and raw that is, there's so much beauty to that too, right? And so I kind of relate to working memory, like yeah, we see our trauma, but we kind of also see the other side of to it, and like there's more to us than just our trauma. So that's kind of how I connect with it, and that's how I kind of rethink it, and how I perceive working memory, and how I've kind of like utilized it throughout this unit, really,
Yeah.
but
Yeah,
yeah.
definitely. I mean, I see that totally the same way. You know, we like to travel to Mexico all the time, and everyone's like, "Oh my gosh, you like to go over there? Aren't you scared?"
Yeah,
I'm like, "Oh my gosh!" I'm like, "The food's so good, it's so cheap, it's so beautiful." You know,
right,
like
yeah.
I mean, and that's all I see. You know, like of course, you don't go down that dark alley, which you wouldn't go over here down a dark
Exactly.
alley. You know, so it's I mean, to me, it's common sense, but yeah, I totally agree. I see it the same way. So yeah, definitely. Very nice. Okay, let me see. Second one, using examples from our studies, how might we consider the interdisciplinary and cultural interventions in public spaces studied in Unit 2 as acts of healing for Central American diasporic communities?
Yeah, definitely. So um coming into college, I knew a little bit of what Chicana studies was, but I didn't know too much of it, right? And then I took my first Chicana studies class, and I was mind blown. I fell in love with the discipline. I found a space for myself, right? And I felt understood, and I was like, oh my God, this is like my identity. Like I finally get it. And I think how much it affected me having this discipline so near and dear to my heart I want that to kind of happen for Central American students, and like creating that space for them where they have their identity, where they are heard, and where their voices are amplified. And I really think that that is a way of healing, and like it's a way of healing, connecting, understanding who they are and what they come from, what their parents are coming from. And I think by having kind of just that space, it's really just allowing them to exist and not fall into the category of being a Chicano, Chicana, or a Mexican, right? And I think like we see that a lot too in the documentary, with the kids who go to El Salvador. There was a kid in the beginning of it. His name is Ernie. He's from UCLA. He says, like Salvadorians, like we exist too, right? And so it's like we have to be able to just give them that space, give them the room to utilize their voice, and like remember that they are very important to the history of the United States. And it's important for
Yeah.
us to like just give them that space. And I feel like that's in a way healing for them, because it's allowing them to just be who they are and speak their truth and talk about their experiences. Because a big part of Chicana classes, it's like speaking about what you've been through, what your family's been through. And so that's like how I would say it's healing. And kind of going back to the readings, cultural interventions by Hernandez, like she states that like they say that it's important to just even have documentaries, poetry, murals, art,
Yeah, artwork. Yeah.
artwork, all those things, to just know that they are here, and like they're not going anywhere, essentially. And I think by just, yeah, like really allowing them to be heard, and like not letting them fall into that circle of being Mexican, like not that we're not welcoming in any way, shape, or form, but really just giving them that platform. Because I feel like in the documentary the kids were saying it too, like Black students, Chicana students, Asian American students, like we've all had that platform, we've all had that space where we feel safe and heard. And I think it's time for them to do that too, right? And so
Yeah.
I think by doing that, that's really how it's healing, specifically for students. And I think by having the artworks and stuff, I think that's healing for the entire community, because you just know that your history is not dead, and it's still very much alive, and it's still very much important. So yeah, that's how I take it as well.
Yeah, that's a really good way to put it. I totally agree with you.
Mhm.
Um, Using examples from our studies, what theories and methods from Unit 2 allowed us to envision the ties that bind Central American, Latinx, Chicanx communities together? And why is it critical to have conversations that center relating ourselves with others and generating connections of others in ourselves?
Yeah, so kind of relating it back to question two, it's really
Yeah.
giving them that space, right? And giving them their voice back, essentially. Because I feel like I'm in a really messed up way. It's almost like their voices have been quieted or stolen, and it's kind of shut down, right? Versus,
Mhm.
Mexican American studies, it's like we are here, like resistance, the Chicana movement. And unfortunately, like that's not how it's been for Central Americans. And so I think when we really think about like how can we uplift those voices, we really have to be allies for them, and we really have to be there for them, and not minimize their experiences, and not minimize their voices either. And I think that's so important, because like I said in like the second question, like I really found my identity, and I want that for all Latinx students, like finally understanding where they're coming from. And I know it's a small step, but kind of like what you said in your interview, Cristina, it's like this class is already a step, right? And like
Yeah.
I've already learned so much, because I had no clue. And like even when I was little, like I thought everyone around me was Mexican, like what was Latino America, I was like, oh, there's like more than just hands, and then it's like I wasn't educated on that. I didn't know that yet, right? And so like it all comes down to education, because I mean that's really what what moves anything forward, is just educating yourself and understanding where people are coming from. And I really do truly think it comes from ethnic studies, and it's such an important discipline because we get to see all those kinds of perspectives. So yeah, definitely being an ally for them. And it's just so important to have all these conversations, because that's how we get to connect with each other and like find those common bonds, you know. At the end of the day, we're all human, and I think we kind of all, as much, you know, indifference there is, like I feel like we can find common ground sometimes, you know, and I really think that that's important in this aspect.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you on that. Yeah, that's education. It's the way to
Mhm.
go, right? Okay. And then we kind of touched base on this a little in that first question, but I wanted to know more specifically, like, in what ways did you relate to working memory? I mean, I know we talked about Mexico and everything,
Yeah.
but are there other ways that, personally, that working memory you can relate to?
Yeah, definitely. Growing up, you know, my parents immigrated from Mexico, and just like you and your grandma, like I was curious. I was like, so why'd you come? Right. And so you know, they gave me like the basic story. We wanted a better life. And like now that I'm older, my mom kind of told me like the truth of it. And that was like your dad was offered to, you know, um, offered to like become part of like the narcos and like drug trafficking and like do all that jazz. And my mom was like, I don't want you to do that. She was like, if you do that, I'm leaving you. Like, I will take the girls and I'm out. So at the time, they had my two older sisters. And so my dad was like, you're not going to leave me, like, blah, blah. And my mom literally packed her bags the next day, and she's like, I will leave you if you continue this. Like, I'm not even kidding, you know? And so my dad was like, oh my God, like I can't, like he loves his daughter. So like he was all like, oh my God, I can't be without them. So they ended up moving like within that same like couple days. And you know, like talking to my dad about it, like he and like my mom's perspective, like for him that was the only way out. You know, it's like we were living in poverty. I didn't have another way, you know, and in a really fucked up way, my apologies. In Mexico, like, you know, talking to my primas or like even like doctors that I go out there and like talk to, um, and they always tell me the same thing. It's like the only way you can like really like lift yourself up from poverty in Mexico is education, and no one can afford that, you know, and it's like
Yeah.
it's so sad. And it's like for me, like I was like, wow, like my dad was really going to do that, but it's because he had no other option, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so I kind of bring that up because it's like as much as I love Mexico, I also realize like there is a lot of darkness, but you can find that darkness anywhere, right? Anywhere in the world.
Yeah.
But to me, like my entire life of going to Mexico, I go to Mexico quite often. It's always been so beautiful and like amazing, and like amazing food, beaches, all of that jazz,
Yeah.
right? And like learning about that when I got older, like wow, like drug trafficking was a lot closer than I had even thought of, right? And so it's like it really like made me think of when my dad and my mom were going through that, and just like, you know, as beautiful as I always consider Mexico and always will, like there is a darkness to it, and I have to know that and respect that, and like that's just the truth, and like that's real, right? So that's
Yeah.
kind of how like I personally relate to it.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. I mean, I've heard stories too where, you know, um, we've, just asked around, like, oh, how does this place stay so nice? Or this man,
Mhm.
it's like, well, because, the narcos, help them out, they do this, but it's like, that's some people's
Right.
only way, like you
Yeah.
said, it's like either education or that,
Yep. Yeah.
it's,
It's tough. It's yeah. Yeah.
it's thank you. Thank you for sharing that. That's interesting to hear. It's cool. Um, Last question. I know none of the questions really touch base, but I thought it was interesting this last article that we read about
Mhm.
the Black Haitians and the border with the Central Americans. But what are your thoughts on it? Like, I mean, I
Yeah.
thought it was interesting.
Yeah. And I definitely like that you asked this too, because like I said, I go to Mexico quite often. This year I haven't like gone actually at all. But last year I was going consistently because I have my foot doctor out there. So like I would go every month, and every time que estabas cruzando la línea, when you'd cross the line,
Yeah.
um, I always saw Black Haitians, and like it got more and more, like more and more of them would appear the more and more I went. So like it was more towards like the end of the year last year that I noticed like October, November, December, like they were there, you know. And my mom would always be like, I mira like Ayasianos. And I was like, wait, what? And I was like, oh my God, like they came from Haiti? And then she's like, yeah, like, and it like mind boggled me, right? But it also like makes me realize like shit, like people are coming from their homes, you know, to find a better life.
Yeah.
And more than anything, this article kind of like it just brings up a lot of emotions when it comes to immigration policies, and you know everything that's happening with the Ukraine and Russia, and the US was just so quick to help the refugees from the Ukraine, right? But there has been so much need for helping immigrants from Central America, from Haiti. And it just angers me that there isn't help for them, but there's help for the Ukraine. Not
Yeah.
that they shouldn't receive help whatsoever. They should.
Yeah.
I believe that everyone, you know, deserves that. And we should be helping them if we have those resources. But it's just like, it's so quick. They're so quick to do it for a first world country or for a white country, like being quite honest, right?
Yeah.
And I think like that's what it just triggered in me even more reading the article. It's just like it's always a race issue. And it makes me sad, it breaks my heart, but it just infuriates me of how like systemically racist America is. And so like those were kind of like the feelings that were brought up upon this article, because I just started thinking about like immigration policy for just like, you know, our people, you know, our neighbors down south, you know, like the USA literally created foreign policies that affected and, you know, intentionally started the Salvadorian War. Like that was our fault, and they refused to help. And so like that's just kind of like where my mind went when I read the article, and like I could go all day because I'm just like, I just find it so frustrating, and it's like it truly does like hurt me and just irks me, you know. And it's like I saw this picture like of this Ukrainian boy, and they were like, he traveled 2,000 miles to the border. And I was like, what about the kids who travel every single day? I was like, there are children who travel every single day to the Mexican border, to the US border, and no one gives a fuck, you know? And so those were kind of the feelings that like really brought up, and like just realizing that it's not just, you know, Mexicans or Central Americans, now it's Haitians, right? And it's like, it's just so big. And like, I just wish we could help everyone. But
I know.
yeah, those are
Yeah,
kind
I totally agree. And I was thinking the same thing. I mean, I think it was last year that I was starting to notice. I'm like, you know, I'm like, wait a minute, what are these? Why are they here? Like, why? There was just so many people by the border, you know? And I was like, and it was like literally maybe a week or two before we had to read that article that I mentioned something to my husband. I was like, he's like, oh yeah, they're coming from, you know, the Caribbean and this. And I was like, really, you know? And then we had to read this article, and I was like, wow. I'm like, perfect timing, you know? Like I was so curious about it, you know? But yeah, same thing. It was just very eye-opening.
Yeah,
you know,
I would agree.
So, but yeah, but thanks for sharing that. I you know, I was kind of wanting to touch bases on that.
Yeah, I'm glad you asked.
You know, I thought it was an interesting read. So
definitely was.
So yeah, so thanks for answering those questions for me.
Yeah, of course. So now we've come to the end, and I feel like I think like we had a really good discussion, because I felt like I was kind of, you know, going back and forth with you and you were with me, but I think that we definitely learned, just went deeper, you know. And I think like being online too, it's kind of always hard to connect with students, right? And so like I really appreciated kind of like jumping on here and just like talking about it, having this discussion.
Yeah, definitely. It was so easy just to back and forth, and yeah, it was kind of, I mean, this unit was very interesting anyway, but
Mm.
I think, the time we have to do this interview is kind of short. Now actually getting into it, um,
Yeah. I'm
I
like,
thought it was going to be a lot harder, but it's just easy to talk about.
it is. Yeah. I would definitely agree. But thank you so much for interviewing with me. It's been great having you as a partner.
Yes, thank
Um,
you so much.
yes, I hope to talk to you soon.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you.